It starts the same way. Something blows up in the Middle East, and suddenly everybody's a strategist. Maps everywhere, arrows everywhere, some guy on TV acting like he's one briefing away from running the Pentagon. The whole thing turns into a mix of panic, prediction, and people pretending they know exactly where this goes next. For a moment, it still feels far away. Then real life cuts in. We're at the gas pump, watching the number climb, doing that little budget math in our head while the price ticks up fast enough to make your head spin. We refresh a flight tab, and the price is suddenly worse. We leave the grocery store with two light bags and a receipt that feels rude for what's actually in them. And there it is, the handoff. Because this is how these conflicts really travel, not as headlines forever, not as some distant crisis floating safely behind a screen. They travel when something far away hits a piece of the system the rest of the world actually depends on. And that's the part that's changed. This isn't about one narrow shipping lane anymore. The question isn't just whether oil gets through, it's what's still standing. Infrastructure is already getting hit. Energy sites are already burning. Nuclear facilities are close enough to the blast radius that people who actually work in the sector are sounding alarms. At that point, markets aren't pricing a delay. They're pricing damage. And once they start pricing damage, the bill starts moving fast. And damage is different. A shipping scare can cool off. A threat can get walked back. A route can reopen. But once actual facilities take hits, the system doesn't just bounce back because the headline moved on. Repairs take time. Output stays lower. Risk stays priced in. That's where this gets uglier. Because now the fear isn't just, can the tankers get through? It's how much of the machine is still online. Power plants, gas processing hubs, oil wells, port operations, water and desalination systems in the Gulf. The more those drift into the blast zone, the less this looks like a temporary scare, and the more it starts looking like a real cost shock with a long tail. And markets don't wait politely for confirmation. They start charging for the possibility. That's when the spread begins. Insurers pull back, shipping gets riskier, freight gets uglier, fuel buyers hedge harder. Airlines start protecting themselves. Factories slow decisions because nobody wants to lock in the wrong costs and get crushed by timing. Everyone upstream starts covering themselves. And by the time it reaches us, it already has fingerprints from 10 different desks on it. That's why this kind of shock always feels slippery when people explain it politely. We get told supply chains are resilient. We get told markets are adjusting. We get told the system is absorbing pressure. Maybe, but the invoice is already moving. And that's why the old Hormuz framing doesn't really hold up anymore. If the only risk were the strait, the whole conversation would be simple. Open or closed, flowing or blocked, crisis or no crisis. But this is worse than simple. You can have ships moving and still have a more expensive system. You can have partial flows and still have damaged assets, higher insurance, tighter product markets, and companies pricing for more attacks. That's the brutal part. The system doesn't need to fully freeze to hurt us. It just needs to get more defensive, more cautious, more padded, more expensive to keep running. Goods can still move. They just move through friction. Orders still get placed, just later at worse terms, with more hesitation baked in. Companies don't have to scream crisis to start protecting margins. They just quietly add buffers and pass the risk downstream. The bombs go off there, but the bill goes off here. First through fuel, then freight, then insurance, then production, then prices, then shelves, then the quiet little edits people make to their lives so the month still closes. And it doesn't stop with price tags. When infrastructure gets hit, businesses don't suddenly get brave. A trucking company doesn't look at that and think it's a great time to expand. An airline doesn't feel calm about the quarter ahead. A manufacturer doesn't love placing large orders while fuel, shipping, and insurance are all moving under its feet. So they do what institutions always do. They hedge, they pause, they delay, they renegotiate, they sit on hiring, they cut risk, and when they can't absorb the extra cost, they pass it along. That's how the damage multiplies. Not through one giant movie scene collapse, but through 1,000 smaller defensive moves that all make sense on their own. One company adds a surcharge, another delays a shipment, another raises prices early, another scales back expansion. Another buys less, another charges more. None of it sounds historic by itself. Together, it changes the atmosphere. And that's why this lands so fast. Most people were already stretched. Rent was already swollen. Debt was already humming in the background. Groceries already had that offensive little quality where the bags feel lighter while the total feels heavier. Plenty of people were already doing that quiet monthly arithmetic where every normal expense has to justify its existence. So when history squeezes one of the world's energy systems, not just the root, but the infrastructure underneath it, it doesn't hit a relaxed society. It hits one that was already clenching. That's why the effect feels personal so quickly. Not because most people study tanker traffic, not because they read shipping bulletins for fun, but because we know the body feel of a budget tightening in real time. We know what it feels like when a normal week suddenly needs edits. Fewer extras, more hesitation. One more thing postponed, one more downgrade dressed up as being responsible. One more moment of pretending the balance is temporary, the spike is temporary, the pressure is temporary. Sometimes it is. A lot of the time, the scar lasts longer than the headline. And if more infrastructure keeps getting hit, that scar doesn't stay theoretical. It becomes higher diesel, tighter fuel markets, delayed repairs, more volatile freight costs, and one more layer of inflation sitting on top of people who were already out of padding. That's the ugliest part of the whole machine. In market language, all of this is rational. Reprice risk, protect margins, build buffers, cut exposure. Fine, that's how the system talks to itself. But in ordinary language, it means something much simpler. People die there, life gets more expensive here. We don't get asked whether this is a good time for fuel, freight, food, and everything attached to them to become more hostile. We don't get a say in whether infrastructure gets hit, insurers panic, exporters cut output, or companies pass the cost along. That is why these wars never stay over there. They move through damaged facilities, insurance desks, supplier contracts, freight rates, corporate caution, and price resets until they arrive in the most ordinary place possible. A tank of gas, a few groceries, a flight home, a month that was already tight before the world decided to tighten it again. And that's the cold truth underneath all of it. What burns first is infrastructure. What burns after that is daily life. When prices rise and quality drops, it's double trouble. Watch our next video to see how inflation does that.